Labour is turning up the pressure on the government as we enter the final days of Parliament before the budget. Follow all the latest news live. Submarines might need upgrades. Australia's full fleet of Collins-class submarines may need to be upgraded before their French-built replacements are ready. Chief of Navy Michael Noonan is assessing how many of the 6 aging vessels will need major work to keep them in service. "We are yet to fully determine how many of the boats we will upgrade," Vice Admiral Noonan told the Senate estimates hearing today. "We're expecting that we will upgrade at least 5, and the work around determining the scope of the upgrade has begun but has not yet been fully decided." Defense had planned to retire the Collins-class submarines from 2026, but has since decided to prolong their lives until the new fleet arrives. The first of the French-built vessels is expected to be delivered in 2032 and enter service about 3 years later, with AAP What's Wrong Life. This image, as Kelly O'Dwyer rose to deliver her valedictory speech, you couldn't help but notice the surprising number of empty seats behind her. Prime Minister Scott Morrison was there, sitting next to Ms. O'Dwyer. Julie Bishop, whom she singled out to thank for her friendship and guidance, watched from the backbench. Most of the ministry showed up, but dozens of Ms. O'Dwyer's coalition colleagues had not shown up. Several more MPs did arrive throughout the minister's speech, filling out some, but nowhere near all, of the empty seats. "That's a lot of empty seats." Source. SUBMARINES. O'Dwyer's brutal parting shot. Kelly O'Dwyer didn't hold back in her valedictory speech, lashing out at the Senate and lamenting a deterioration in trust towards democracy. Ms. O'Dwyer said Parliament's upper house had become a forum to frustrate the government's agenda and the will of the people in recent years. She said Australia should consider adopting its own version of Britain's Salisbury Convention, something Senate President Scott Ryan has called for. This would mean parties agreeing to abide by the convention, that the Senate would not obstruct the passage of legislation to affect public policy that has been fully and fairly disclosed to the Australian people well before voting commences in an election. She said, "My time in this place has coincided with a deterioration in trust of both this institution and indeed the very concept of democracy. Social media and a proliferation of tribal echo chambers have led to warped perceptions of Australians' views, a failure to listen to alternative ideas, and a decline in genuine policy debate and civil discourse." She advised her colleagues to spend more time in their communities. In a speech heavy on policy, Ms. O'Dwyer spoke passionately about the role of women in society. "We sell ourselves short as a nation if we don't maximize the talents and expertise of both halves of our population," she said. "There should be no limit on what girls and women can aspire to, and no limit on what they achieve. You can have a family, serve at the highest levels and make a serious and lasting contribution to our country. We must be mindful that a choice today can have long-term consequences. So that means we need to have better pathways back into work after having children, more flexible work to accommodate family responsibilities, and more affordable childcare." She said Australia needed to give men more flexibility at work as well, a problem she called the flexibility gap. Ms. O'Dwyer criticized that spend now, pay later governing philosophy she said had infected the previous Labour government. Labour's budgets and the trajectory they set were, quite simply, an intergenerational wealth transfer from our children and our grandchildren to us. It is wrong to expect the next generation of Australians to fund a higher standard of living for us than they will ever experience. She spoke proudly of her support for same-sex marriage, despite the resistance inside her own party. "One of the most nerve-wracking days that I had as a new MP was the day that I walked into the Federation chamber to announce my support for same-sex marriage," she said. "Many warned me it was a career-limiting move, and maybe it was at the time, but I believe it was the right thing to do, and I am proud that it will be the legacy of a Liberal government." As she thanked her colleagues, Ms. O'Dwyer singled out Julie Bishop for her friendship and guidance. She also reserved some particularly warm words for Malcolm Turnbull and Scott Morrison, telling the latter his leadership has never been more needed than now, but no one received more praise than her husband and children. "He is quite simply a great man, wonderful husband, brilliant father, and I just love him to bits," Ms. O'Dwyer said, tearing up. "Olivia and Edward, you make my heart sing, and I love you more than words can express. There is nothing that gives me greater joy than being your mum." Kelly O'Dwyer delivering her valedictory speech. Picture, app source. AAPJENNY Macklin's last speech. Jenny Macklin has delivered her valedictory speech, saying it's time to move on and let a new generation of brilliant people make an impact in politics. They're having a bet about how soon I'll cry, Ms. Macklin joked before starting, and sure enough, she teared up. There is nothing wrong with having a big heart in politics, she said, going on to quote Martin Luther King, "Power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love." Ms. Macklin took a moment to compliment the other side of politics. "It doesn't happen often, but when we find a common cause, it's important and impactful. What an amazing day it was when we all voted together for the National Disability Insurance Scheme," she said. Her speech was a powerful defense of the social safety net. "Each of us is subject to the twists and turns of fate. Our social safety net is there to protect everyone, and everyone deserves the security of knowing it's there when they need it," she said. "If these fundamentals of Australian life break down, or only exist for the better off, then our social fabric breaks down." Her speech was followed by a lot of tearful hugs and congratulations. Jenny Macklin delivering her valedictory speech. Picture, app source. AAPCANCER Council withdraws attack. Cancer Council Queensland has withdrawn its claim that Labor's franking credits policy could lead to fewer donations. The submission was prepared and submitted in breach of a Cancer Council Federation charter which requires joint organisational positions on matters of federal policy to be deferred to Cancer Council Australia. Chief Executive Chris McMillan said in a letter to the House Economics Committee, "I take full responsibility for the error." Treasurer Josh Frydenberg used the original submission to attack Labor during question time today. "We know it's going to affect charities, because the Cancer Council said two of our major donors have advised that they are unlikely to be in a position to donate," Mr. Frydenberg said. "That is in a letter from the Cancer Council of Queensland, and it is very clear." Tony Burke then tried, and failed, to table the retraction. Did he or didn't he? During question time, Scott Morrison said he was advised Joe Hockey did not instruct staff to meet QBT, the subsidiary of Hello World, to discuss the tender. News.com.au has seen an email from a DFAT official, who says, "Ambassador Hockey has asked that I set up a meeting." However, that email does not mention the tender. Conspiracy theorists visa cancelled. The government has reportedly cancelled the visa of notorious British conspiracy theorist David Icke, banning him from entering Australia for his planned speaking tour next month. Mr. Icke believes September 11th was an inside job, the Holocaust never happened, and the world is being controlled by a cabal of alien lizards, among other things. DVIRA Bramovic, the man behind the campaign to revoke Mr. Icke's visa, said it was glorious victory for Australians who believe in respect and tolerance. Conspiracy theorist David Icke. Source: Supplied travel company response. Hello World has released a statement to the ASX addressing the Joe Hockey story. This morning an article appeared in The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald suggesting the Australian ambassador to the United States, Joe Hockey, pushed for a contract, print version, or requested a meeting, revised online version, with Hello World subsidiary QBT in relation to the provision of travel services to DFAT in the United States. It reads, QBT was awarded a contract in 2015 to provide travel management services to government agencies, including DFAT. In 2017, QBT requested a meeting with the FAT personnel in the United States to discuss the provision of travel management services in the U.S., and this meeting took place. QBT understands DFAT met a number of travel service providers as part of its considerations in relation to the provision of travel services. In August 2018, DFAT started a formal tender process, which QBT has responded to. No announcement has been made in relation to this tender. At no time have Ambassador Hockey or Hello World CEO Andrew Burns discussed the DFAT tender, and neither Mr. Hockey nor Mr. Burns have had any involvement in the tender process. Mr. Burns did not request the meeting with DFAT personnel. Lies, travel controversy. EXPLODESA rowdy question time was dominated by questions about the travel company Hello World, which Matthias Cormann used to book his flights to Singapore. As you might recall, this morning we learned former Treasurer and current U.S. Ambassador Joe Hockey told staff from the embassy in Washington to meet with a Hello World executive. The point was to help the company understand the travel requirements of foreign affairs staff before it lobbied for government work. Mr. Hockey is one of the company's largest shareholders. Labour's Jim Chalmers repeatedly asked the government about reports that DFAT has documents relating to Mr. Hockey's request to embassy staff to set up a meeting, if such documents exist, and if such reports exist, I'm sure that we can find those things out when we actually investigate the efficacy of this question. Christopher Pine said, I'm not going to simply accept on face value that because the opposition says something, it makes it true. Mr. Chalmers eventually moved to suspend standing orders on the issue, saying there were a lot more questions to be asked. What really gave it away in question time today was when we started asking about the travel arrangements between Mr. Burns and others, the ashen faces. The ashen faces, right along the front bench. All these people hoping that the next question wasn't to them, Mr. Chalmers said. He said he was going to refer to the issue as Chumgate, a dig at Scott Morrison's line from Question Time the other day, so many Liberal Party chums are involved in Chumgate, right up and down the front bench and beyond, all the way up into the cheap seats. There's a lot of chums involved in this scandal, and we're going to get to the bottom of Chumgate, aren't we? He said. What are they up to? Flying around on free flights, ringing up their mates, getting insider deals, doing deals, awarding big government contracts to people that they are intimately involved with in the Liberal Party. Mr. Pine responded, saying Mr. Chalmers had a pathetic case, and was engaging in its straight-out slur. He said Joe Hockey had declared his shareholding in Hello World before the meeting in question, and had no role in the tender process. Labour has tried to come up with a story of lies, a tissue campaign to try to create a smear and a slur and distract the people from the real issues that are coming at this next election, Mr. Pine said. The motion to suspend standing orders was defeated. Christopher Pine. Picture, app source. App Quaidbleeg's girlfriend pleads guilty. Partner of former Australian Border Force boss Roman Quaidbleeg has pleaded guilty to misleading corruption investigators. Sarah Jane Chisholm Rogers, 24, had previously denied 3 charges related to her giving evidence to the Australian Commission for Law Enforcement Integrity about her employment. Rogers arrived hand-in-hand with 54-year-old Mr. Quaidbleeg today at Sydney's Downing Centre local court. Defense lawyer Brian Wrench entered guilty pleas to 1 count of giving false or misleading evidence and 1 count of disclosing the existence of or information about a summons to another person. Rogers left court, again with her partner, shielding her face with her left hand and sporting a gold ring on her ring finger. Mr. Quaidbleeg was sacked in March 2018 for abusing his power by helping his partner get a job at Sydney Airport. Roman Quaidbleeg left, and Sarah Jane Chisholm Rogers. Picture, app source. AAPMICHAELIA Cash's brutal PUTDOWNA pretty savage sledge was buried in all the back and forth between Michaelia Cash and Doug Cameron. Ms. Cash took issue with Mr. Cameron's comments earlier today, when he said she was a disgraced minister, who had been demoted and should resign. I do have to respond to the fact that I was demoted, Ms. Cash said. I am a cabinet minister. I don't think Senator Cameron, who is leaving here in a few weeks, has ever had that privilege. He will never actually have that privilege. Ouch. Protesting kids should be at school. So far question time has progressed much as you would expect, with Labour asking about Michaelia Cash and Matthias Cormann, and pressuring the government to schedule more parliamentary sitting weeks. One of the more interesting exchanges has come from Greens MP Adam Banton. Of all people, Nationals leader Michael McCormack, will you join me in congratulating the courageous school students going on strike on March 15th, right around the country, calling for urgent climate action and the protection of Australia's infrastructure? Mr. Bant asked, will you commend these young people and the 15,000 who went on to strike last November, for taking time off school to show us what real leadership looks like? In short, no, Mr. McCormack would not commend them. The children should be at school, that's where they they should be, he said. They should be learning about Australian history, they should be learning about Australian geography, they should be learning about all the lessons that their teachers are willing to teach them. The member for Melbourne would do far better off advising those children to go to school and to stay at school. Who's going to look after those kids when they're out protesting? I know the Greens like to protest because that's all you ever bring to the national debate, protests and frivolous rallies. Mr. Band eventually interrupted with a point of order, on relevance. Perhaps the Deputy Prime Minister might also like to explain what the children should do with the science they've learned, he said. Points of order aren't an opportunity to ask a supplementary question, Speaker Tony Smith said, promptly shutting him down. You've been humiliated. Cash Barata. Doug Cameron finally got his wish as Michael Cash turned up for the afternoon session of Senate estimates. It didn't take long for the exchange between the pair to get nasty. We are now rapidly heading towards taxpayer expenditure of about $1 million to deal with the cover-up in relation to your staff leaking details of the AWU raid, Mr. Cameron said. Don't you think it's about time you just came clean? Be honest about this and save the taxpayer any more unnecessary expenditure. Ms. Cash said she had followed all the proper processes, and reeled off a list of Labour ministers whose legal fees had also been paid by taxpayers. Legal assistance, regardless of who is in office, is provided to ministers when the proceedings involve their ministerial duties. Applications themselves are actually approved by the Attorney General. She said she had already answered questions about her conduct. I gave evidence under oath in the federal court last Friday. All questions were put to me and were answered. I have given evidence under oath in relation to my knowledge of the raids. That evidence under oath is consistent with the evidence that I gave for the last 15 months, but Mr. Cameron was not satisfied. You've been humiliated. Your credibility has been shredded. Why don't you come clean and actually correct the record, Mr. Cameron said. Ms. Cash then went on the counterattack, openly wondering what was in the documents the AFP seized from the AWU offices. I would like to know what is in the documents, Ms. Cash said. You do have to start to wonder, does it show that Mr. Shorten didn't have the appropriate authorizations to donate to Get Up and to his own campaign? Ms. Cash repeatedly refused to answer questions about her former staffer's testimony in the federal court, saying she would not provide a running commentary on the case based on media reports, and would instead wait for a certified transcript. The court proceedings are actually still on foot. I have no knowledge of whether my former chief of staff has finished giving evidence, she said. I will not be providing a running commentary on the case. The cover-up continues, Mr. Cameron said. Michael Cash during Senate estimates. Source: Supplied school choice on chaplains. Another little tidbit from Tanya Plibersik's speech at the National Press Club. Under Labour, schools will choose whether they want to employ chaplains. Schools can choose to employ chaplains if they wish. Or they can choose to employ a secular youth worker, social worker, someone with adequate qualifications to give support, mentoring, deliver social welfare in the students, Ms. Plibersik said. Greens, Bill Shorten got spooked while Tanya Plibersik was denying the existence of a policy rift between herself and Bill Shorten on the Christmas Island issue. Greens leader Richard Di Natale was saying the exact opposite. Just when you begin to hope that the Labour Party was starting to find a backbone on refugees, Bill Shorten has gone to water, he said, despite his deputy saying the government's policy to transfer sick patients to Christmas Island for treatment was difficult to understand, and his immigration spokesman was saying reopening the center was silly. Bill Shorten thinks it's fine. All it took was a little criticism from Peter Dutton and one bad poll result for Bill Shorten to get spooked and start aligning himself with the Liberal government on the issue again. Greens leader Richard Di Natale. Picture, Kim Smith. Source: News Corp Australian. It true. Plibersek denies rift with Shorten. There has been a bit of confusion about Labour's position on taking asylum seekers to Christmas Island for medical treatment. If medical treatment is required and it is delivered on Christmas Island, that's fine, Bill Shorten said yesterday. This morning, his deputy Tanya Plibersik adopted a much more skeptical tone. It's up to the government to explain how people who couldn't get proper medical care on Manus Island and Nauru can somehow get proper treatment on Christmas Island, which of course has good but limited treatment available, Ms. Plibersik told ABC Radio. Asked about the difference between her position and Mr. Shorten's at the press club, Ms. Plibersek said there was none. You and Bill Shorten have split on whether treating asylum seekers on Christmas Island is good or not. He says it is fine. You voiced caution on this. What is Labour's position? She was asked. Your question, that pretends there is some difference between Bill and I on the issue of asylum seekers, is not true. The proposition is absolutely false, Ms. Plibersek replied. I'll say this. It is up to the government to explain how people who cannot be adequately treated on Manus Island and Nauru can have adequate medical treatment on Christmas Island. It is up to them to explain how that can happen. It is up to them to explain how they justify the extra expense of doing it this way, given that this government has already brought hundreds of people from Manus Island and Nauru to Australia to the mainland for medical treatment, so she doesn't think it is fine, then. Plibersek slams teacher bashing. Tanya Plibersek has spoken about Labour's education policies at the National Press Club, saying the most important thing she could do as education minister would be to not join the teacher bashing. I never got in trouble at school, of course, she said, drawing laughter, but if I had gone home and said to my parents that I got in trouble, I would have been in worse trouble at home. I wouldn't have had my mum and dad up at the school saying, my little darling never does anything wrong. How can you falsely accuse her? It does seem to me, from reports from principals and teachers, and indeed from reporting we have seen in the media, of principals having to send letters home to school communities saying, come on, parents, back off. You have to be more courteous when you are dealing with our teaching staff. This is a growing phenomenon. Tanya Plibersek at the National Press Club. Source: ABCL at TTLEPROUD sells Woolworths shares. Agriculture Minister David Littleproud has decided to sell his shares in Woolworths to shut down any perception of a conflict of interest in his so-called war on Coles and Aldi. I've instructed my broker to sell my 25 shares in Woolworths worth $756.25, which returned $15 last year. Any proceeds will be donated to the Western Queensland drought appeal, he said in a statement. Labour was using it as a distraction from the real issue. Dairy farmers aren't getting paid a fair price for their milk. The shares and their $15 return created absolutely no conflict of interest, and I will continue to bash Coles and Aldi for their poor treatment of farmers, as well as Woolworths when they deserve it. That's that then. Coleman grilled on Christmas Island. Immigration Minister David Coleman has been grilled on Christmas Island's capacity to provide medical treatment to asylum seekers. It's a fair question, given the government intends to send asylum seekers transferred off Nauru and Manus Island there. We'll ensure that adequate medical facilities are provided. So if a person needs to be treated for a particular matter, adequate facilities will be provided at Christmas Island, Mr. Coleman told Sky News. However, he refused to comment on the current state of Christmas Island's medical facilities. Mr. Coleman also defended Nauru's right to require a doctor to have seen asylum seekers in person before approving transfers, a requirement that could seriously hobble the process. Nauru's a sovereign nation, and obviously Nauru will make decisions that it thinks are appropriate for Nauru, he said. We've worked with Nauru successfully on medical evacuations over the years. We'll always work with Nauru, but Nauru is a sovereign nation. Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs David Coleman. Source: News Corp Australia. Floor price for milk stunted. David Littleproud called a press conference to address Labour's push to ask the ACCC to investigate a floor price on milk. That motion was defeated in the House a little earlier, as the Nationals voted against it. Mr. Littleproud said the move would have given farmers the wrong idea. I'd rather sit here and look them in the eye and say that won't happen than play political stunts with their livelihoods, he said. And speaking of political stunts, can I finish off with the one that Mr. Fitzgibbon has played in terms of the shares I have in Woolworths? I think the dividend per year is about $15. I tried to sell these shares some time ago. If that is the level of contribution to the debate around trying to besmirch my character, I'm fighting for dairy farmers. Is he fit to be here? I've got shares in Telstra and big banks, and let me tell you, I've had a stink with all of them, and I'm not afraid to have a stink with them because I will support the people I'm here to represent. I'm here to represent the agricultural Australia, and I'll continue to do that. Meanwhile, the National Farmers Federation has released a statement saying it is highly cautious about simple solutions to the dairy industry's complex problems. However, it said it was willing to listen to new strategies, and that includes hearing the ACCC's thoughts on the merits of a minimum farm gate milk price. Stop hiding. Frustrated senators unleash the Michael cash saga has blown up in Senate estimates again, with Labor's Doug Cameron accusing her of hiding from questions. Another minister, Linda Reynolds, appeared for the morning session of estimates, with Ms. Cash due to front up this afternoon. The small business portfolio is Senator Cash. Is Senator Cash going to appear this morning? Mr. Cameron asked. I will be here for some of the day, and Senator Cash, and in fact Senator Payne will be here some of the day as well. As we did at the last estimates, Ms. Reynolds replied. That started a frustrating back and forth that lasted more than 15 minutes. Why is Senator Cash hiding from estimates? Mr. Cameron said, these are her areas of responsibility, and I think it's totally unacceptable that a junior minister, let me finish, that a junior minister is here when a cabinet minister has got the responsibility for this area of questioning, and she just hides. Ms. Reynolds said the small business portfolio was predominantly the responsibility of Kelly O'Dwyer, who sits in the House, but that she, Ms. Cash and Ms. Payne were covering it for her during estimates. I am perfectly competent and across this brief of issues. So Senator Cameron, it might not suit your rather harsh political tactics, but I am here as appropriate, and you will just have to wait until Senator Cash appears later today, she said. I don't know what you mean by harsh political tactics. You shouldn't start flailing around so early, he shot back. If you want to keep asking these questions over and over again, please feel free, but you are wasting the time of the officials here, Ms. Reynolds said. Chair Slade Brockman eventually jumped in to suggest they move on. Spoiler alert, they did not move on. She really can't hide. She has to be here, Mr. Cameron said. You're talking about hiding. The only thing being hidden in this issue is the Labour Party doing everything they can to avoid those AWU documents coming and seeing the light of day, Ms. Reynolds said. Why don't you contact your mates, contact the leader of the opposition and say, we have nothing to hide, I know who's hiding, Mr. Cameron replied. You had an extraordinary amount of time with Senator Cash yesterday to talk about these issues. Senator Cash did anything but hide, Ms. Reynolds said. She reiterated that she was willing and able to answer the committee's questions. I would really prefer to be asking a cabinet minister rather than a junior minister, Mr. Cameron said. The government should stop sending junior ministers in to try to cover up and hide Senator Cash. You can insult me all you like, but you have a responsible government minister who is across this portfolio, Ms. Reynolds said. With everyone thoroughly frustrated, the committee finally took a short break, drawing a line under the issue. Senator Doug Cameron's frustrated